Media, a very good afternoon to you, and thank you for responding to our invitation for this press conference. Sharing the head table with me this afternoon to my immediate left is Mr. Joseph Hamilton, Member of Parliament. Then Mrs. Indra Chandrapal, Member of Parliament. To my immediate right, Mr. Anil Nandlal, Member of Parliament, and Ms. Africo Selman to my far right, Member of Parliament. We have just concluded the budget debate and the 3 days of consideration of estimates. And last night, the appropriation bill of 2015 was passed by the House. We'd like to put on public record that we believe that our approach to Budget 2015 was in keeping with the spirit, intent, and mandate that we received from the people of Guyana and those who we represent as their elected representatives. But we went to the National Assembly for Budget 2015 not only to represent the 200,000 plus people that voted PPPC on May 11, but to represent all Guyanese. And as a result of that, our approach was, one, to be helpful, to hold the government to account. And even when there was a discovery of grave discrepancies as it relates to the estimates as presented, we choose not to be obstructionists, but rather to be objective and to lend our expertise and support to ensure that the people of Guyana get a budget. Today's press conference, we will be reviewing and presenting to you some of our views and our thoughts so that the people of Guyana could become more aware, because I know they were following, some by radio, some by television, some by live streaming, but there are some issues that probably were not adequately ventilated that needs to be addressed. We'd like to put on record again our grave disappointment as it relates to limiting the opposition to only 3 days for the examination of the estimates. Those of you who covered those proceedings, inasmuch as His Honor the Speaker graciously sat there for extended hours, 3 o'clock on 3 a.m. and 2 mornings, and this morning almost to 4 a.m. to see that the nation's business was done, you would still discover that he had to shut down questions at very crucial times to ensure that we get through with all of the business. And it was clear that 3 days was wholly inadequate. And the fact that the government, even before the constituting and meeting of the business subcommittee of the Committee of Supply met to determine the schedule and allocation of times for the consideration of these estimates, no less a person than the Honorable Prime Minister himself moved a motion to restrict the time for the examination of these estimates to 3 days. We felt it was because they did not want to have to account to the people of Guyana. So this whole mantra of accountability, transparency, and trust us, this was the first excursion of the new government into the public foray where accountability and transparency was concerned. And the people of Guyana, they had an opportunity to judge for themselves. So I wouldn't be the one, unlike what the government does, giving themselves their own grades. The people of Guyana will judge, and the people of Guyana will determine what grades to give where accountability and transparency is concerned as it relates to the just concluded process of the consideration of estimates of 2015 and Budget 2015. I will have my comrades make some statements, and then we will have some questions. So I'll take Comrade Indra Chanchapal, then Mr. Nandalal, then Mr. Hamilton, then Ms. Africo Selman, and then we will take your questions. So Mr. Indra Chanchapal.
Thank you very much, members of the press. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree wholeheartedly with the sentiments that you have expressed with respect to the debate that we've had for it's 5 days of debate and 3 days in which we look at the expenditure. And I believe that the 3 days were inadequate, as we have seen, because it has put a lot of pressure on parliamentarian and all the staff of the various ministries, as well as the Parliament office. And you yourself, as press people, you had to be there until the wee hours of the morning. And then, again, you had to be there early morning. So I think it was unnecessary, that we should have stuck to the standing orders that stipulated 5 days, at least 5 days, and if you have to go to 7 days, you do so. So that's my first issue that I want to raise. I spoke on the issue of governance in my presentation to the Assembly. And one of the issues that I spoke about is the question of the audits. Because, and I have made the point that I had been in the Public Accounts Committee for more than 10 years. And therefore, I was really surprised the way the government, when they were in opposition, responded to these questions. And you know, when we had asked the questions about the audit, about the process, you were not getting information. But we knew that it would have been about $150 to $200 million. And also we were concerned about the process because people were talking about it. People who were asked to get involved in the audits were speaking to some of the issue, that they find it very strange that two persons who were the mouthpiece of the PNC or the APNU coalition were calling them to ask about whether they want to become involved in the audits. And I find that totally unacceptable. Because those of us who have been part of the Public Accounts Committee, and all of us who have been in the Parliament, are very much aware that there is a process with respect to audits, and that all of this has to be dealt with by the Office of the Auditor General, and it is stipulated in our laws. And therefore, what they have sought to do with this audit, I think it's an indictment, firstly, about the thrust, or wanting to tell the Guyanese you believe in transparency and accountability. So you violated the first principle. And we were told that it was also sole sourcing. And there was no mechanism, as based on what was reported to us last night, in terms of how people were identified. The second issue that I need to bring to your attention is the question of the Rights Commission. Now, we are all aware of the fact that when the constitutional process of 2003 brought in to being the Rights Commission, for example, whether it's the Human Rights, the Women and Gender Equality Commission, the Rights of the Child Commission, and the Indigenous People Commission, that it was never intended to be under any ministry, as we say, under any political operatives. So it was shocking, because I know when the Women and Gender Equality Commission and the Rights of the Child and the Indigenous Peoples Commission came into being, everything had to do solely with the people who were part of the commission, the chair, the deputy chair, and the commissioners themselves making decisions. So it was shocking when we looked at the budget, the expenditure for 2015, and we noted, for example, Women and Gender Equality Commission, the Rights of the Child, and Indigenous People Commission came under the Ministry of Social Protection, as well as Ethnic Relation Commission coming under the Office of the President. And it was never envisaged that way, and all of us were appalled when we saw what was happening. And therefore, I think on our side, all of us who spoke to the issue, we were very vigorous pointing out that it was a violation of the Constitution, and we were happy subsequently when it was recognized that there will be a need to rectify this, and it was indeed rectified. And also the other issue I want to bring to your information is, you are members of the press, you were there, and we are, all of us who have been in government, we are pretty much aware of the fact that, you know, you always have your technical people who will have all the information that are available at fingertips if you need them. I know, for example, when I was minister, and all those of us who were ministers, we always ensure that we were properly prepared so that whether you go to the parliament or whatever, that you have access to information and were prepared to provide those. I know in past instances, we've had situations we could not have provided the information readily, but nonetheless, those informations were made available before the debates concluded. And what did we find in this time? We were promised a whole lot of information. These will be laid over. Some will be made available on Wednesday and the next morning. And up to this morning, as the debate was closed, those information never came to us. So that is something that we will pursue. So you are preaching the mantra of accountability and transparency, and we will hold the government accountable to providing that information to us, because, as was stated before, we are representing more than 200,000 people in this country who have voted for us, as well as 7 regions. The other issue I raised and had to do with the fact that there was a difference of 1 vote, and I need to make that point. When the government side tried to preach us about they won, we have to keep reminding them, why didn't you open the ballot box for Region 8? It is a question of 1 vote. So we dare them to open the ballot box, because we know that a lot of the rejected votes are votes that were for the PPPC. And we know that it has happened in many other places. And when the election, the whole process will be over, when the matter would have been taken to, it's already taken to the court, I know that we would be proven right. And I also pointed out, finally, in terms of governance, the whole question of discrimination. It is very pronounced, and if you're talking about national unity and cohesion and all these things, my goodness, you need to have an even hand. And I pointed out about the REOs, and I made reference to the one in Barbies, where the person who was removed is qualified and experienced and is being replaced by someone who
That's
lacked
the
RHO who had lacked the experience, and so on and so forth. I want to say that this government or this party has documented, and we will continue to document everything that violates the Constitution, any act of discrimination against the people. We will be championing these issues. So we are signaling to all the people out there that this is the way we will operate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Indra. Comrade Anil Nandlal.
Thank you very much, Bishop Ejel. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, as you are aware, we have concluded the first budgetary exercise of the coalition government, and we were able to witness firsthand certain worrying characteristics which I wish to highlight to you. And I want to begin with the rule of law. I highlighted to you at a different press conference a commitment made by the finance minister at page 55 of his budget speech, where he committed the APNU AFC coalition government to a government that is transparent, a government that is committed to the principles of public accountability, inclusive governance, and the rule of law. And the very next exercise that followed the presentation of that speech was the estimates. And lo and behold, in the estimates, they were replete with instances of illegalities and non-compliance with the laws of this country. This government perhaps will go down in history as being the first government to have disobeyed the first laws that it ever passed. The Constitution Amendment Act and the Financial Management and Accountability Amendment Act were two of the first pieces of legislation that they passed. They made great public fanfare of it. They said that it is intended to restore public accountability and to remove from certain constitutional agencies political interference and contamination. And then they presented a budget that placed these agencies in violation of those very laws into the categories of ministries, defeating the very purpose of the law. That was pointed out to them, and fortunately, they agreed to amend the estimates, and that was done. Then also you have the other instances where we have a creation of a whole new number of ministries for the first time in the accounting architecture of Guyana without them being made part of the public accounting system. The Financial Management and Accountability Act carries a schedule that lists all monies that are to, all entities that are to receive funding from the budgetary process. If you create new ministries, if you create new agencies, then you have to add those to that schedule to qualify them to benefit from public monies. That was not done. So we had to await for an order to be sent to the official gazette to add these new ministries and new agencies which were created to the accounting infrastructure of our country in compliance with the Financial Management and Accountability Act. Now these are basic things that ought to have been done, and they were not done. It demonstrates, in my respectful view, a level of incompetence that should never reside in a government. These are not extraordinary mistakes. These are very simple, elementary, and rudimentary mistakes that should never have been made in the first place. Then we have the other question of accountability and non-compliance with our laws. Our Constitution, along with the Financial Management and Accountability Act, lay down a regime of procedures regarding the expenditure of public funds when there is no budget. There is a limit to spending, that's the first thing, and I've spoken about it on innumerable occasions. And when spending is done in that instance, when in the absence of an appropriation act, then at the earliest available opportunity, you present to the Parliament financial papers recording these expenditures, and you seek ex post facto approval from the National Assembly for these monies because they have come from the consolidated fund. You would recall repeated instances of Dr. Ashley Singh bringing to the Parliament financial papers, etc., whenever Parliament is in recess or was not sitting for any protracted period of time. We had a period of nearly 2.5 months where the Parliament did not sit, and we had huge disbursements being made from the consolidated fund. Well, we are not even sure where they came from, and that's another issue that I want to address. But let us assume for the purposes of argument that it came from the consolidated fund. It could not have come from any other place. So we had billions of dollars sent to Gaisuku. It was a total about some 8 billion. And another huge chunk of money going to other agencies. Now, we are not objecting to these monies being spent to Gaisuku or wherever they were directed. They were needed and they were spent. That is not my complaint. My complaint is about the complete disregard for the laws and the rules of accountability from a government that has committed itself to public accountability and to the rule of law. So we had all the expenditure of billions of dollars, totaling over $8 billion, and there is nothing in the budget, nothing in the estimates, and no financial paper laid in relation to those monies, where they came from, and for what purpose were they spent. Even when the finance minister was being asked, one would have expected if they did not lay the financial papers separately, they could have incorporated it in the estimates and make it part of the Appropriation Act eventually. That was not done. So the nation is at loss to understand where the finance minister got this money from. And when the questions were asked of him last night, no sensible answer was provided. Then you have in the estimate, in his budget speech itself, he made references to budgetary allocations. $23 billion, for example, for the rice farmers. You all heard that. It was carried in the front page of the newspapers. The rice farmers were very elated. Lo and behold, we cannot find this $23 billion anywhere in the estimates. Now, that is a serious indictment on the public accountability system of our country, and it makes hollow the commitment of this finance minister regarding public accountability. And this is a finance minister who has tabled a law in the parliament that amended the FMAA to make the finance minister chargeable when there is financial discrepancies. The previous act, the substantive act, held public officers responsible. They changed that. This finance minister changed that to say that the minister of finance can be held criminally responsible for these types of omissions or non-accountability. And he himself seemed to be guilty of those wrongs. Then we have the situation of the general aura of arrogance, marked reluctance, and plain, forthright refusal to answer questions in the Committee of Supply posed by the opposition. Now, the business of the Committee of Supply is one of the most important business of any civilized parliament. It is where the nation accounts are scrutinized, not for the benefit of the opposition, but for the benefit of the people of Guyana, so that they can understand what monies have been budgeted for their welfare in the ensuing financial year. And a government doesn't owe a favor, but has a mandatory obligation and duty to make those disclosures. And when the opposition is asking, they are demanding an entitlement, because we are acting on behalf of the people of Guyana. I don't want that information to take home with me for my own personal edification. I want it so that I can explain to my constituents well, for this financial year, these are the things that are going to be fixed in your communities. But you find repeatedly in this administration, during this exercise, many ministers flippantly refusing to divulge information, making excuses, for example, in a very flippant way. Okay, we will give you that information Wednesday morning or Friday, and somebody at the back making fun and being facetious about the whole exercise, saying there's an answer you'll have to get till Wednesday. Imagine the person performing the functions of the local government minister claiming ignorance in terms of who are the 10 regional executive officers in the 10 administrative regions of this country, asking until 72 hours hence to produce that information. That is an insult to the people of this country. Because you know and I know that he knew who those REOs are, but he simply refused to divulge that information. And then the other worrying component is that there is some effort, deliberate effort, not to disclose even that which is stated on the estimates. And you have the instance of the disclosures which emanated from Minister Nicolette Henry regarding expenditures for the inauguration of President Granger and his government. You will recall that questions were asked of several government ministers, and I believe they repeatedly and consistently said that that event was funded from monies donated by party supporters, well-wishers, friends, and sympathizers. That is what the information they gave to the public. And then you had Ms. Henry last night disclosing under a line item under the Ministry of Youth that some 36 billion was spent for two events.
Million, she said.
Two events. One, the cleaning of the stadium for some cricket match, and for the inauguration. And when that information was reported by a news agency present in the Parliament, and it was drawn to the minister's attention, the minister stood up and denied that she ever made that disclosure, egged on and supported by the entire government side, when all of you who were there would have heard what she said. And there was a threat that came from the government side to ban that news agency from coming into the Parliament and covering future parliamentary proceedings. Those are worrying signs from a government that is only 3 months old. And that must be juxtaposed against a prime minister that seeks to sanction a reporter because of a manner in which he carried his story. An objective story, good story, factual, but it made the government, put the government in an adverse public light. And then you had immediately following that, you had another revelation that the Prime Minister will now monitor headlines of the state newspapers. These taken together, they create an impression of authoritarianism. And this is a government that has a history of authoritarianism. So those are some of the matters that I want to highlight as legal anomalies, unlawfulness, and assaults on democratic traditions, which I believe characterized the budget exercise which we just concluded.
Thank you.
I'll pause there.
Thank you, Mr. Nandalal. We now hear from Mr. Joseph Hamilton on his perspective.
Thank you very much, Bishop Ejil. What we note on what my comrades there outlined is that the government has a tendency of spewing lies and deceit. The nation was told when ministers and ministries were being constructed that there was established a ministry of cohesion and a ministry of citizenship, and ministers were appointed. Also, there was a minister and ministry of governance. The budget document that came to the Parliament, and when examined, what we found out that in the case of cohesion, that was a department in the Ministry of the Presidency. In the case of citizenship, Mr. Felix, that was a department in the Ministry of the Presidency. And finally, in the case of Mr. Trotman, that also was a department in the Ministry of the Presidency. Members of the media, you cannot be a minister and you don't have a ministry, or you shouldn't be. So we have persons who are being paid via public funds, ministerial salaries, with all the benefits that come with it. But in effect, they're managing departments in the Ministry of the Presidency. So that is a major lie and deceit that was perpetuated on the people of Guyana. The other issue, and Anil touched on it, is you had Minister Nicolette Henry speaking last night. And there are a couple of things with the same inauguration money. You would know that the budget was structured from January to August. That is the period of under the old ministries, as you know them. But when she reported about the money spent on the president inauguration, she was reporting on the period from September to December. So in large measure, for public accountability, that money was wrongly placed. It could not have been and should not have been in the final third of the year. And then you had also, she's reporting in that period, and she's telling us that the $100 and something million spent for cultural activities, some of this money was used for matrimony activities, Indian Arrival Day, and emancipation and those kind of things. All of those activities, they had already, so no expenditure could have been, should have been, in the September to December period. And the other important thing, whilst the government presented a budget and passed an appropriation act of $221 billion, the reality is that budget is overstated by some $40 billion. Because in the case of the capital program, is about over $39 billion. I'm contending, we are contending, less than 50% of that $39 billion will be expended, because we're just talking about a 4-month period. And Bishop Ejil, who was a Minister of Finance, would tell you the procedures and all the other things that will have to take place. Because most of these programs are not multi-year programs, so they are not rolling over. They are programs that should be completed, must be completed by the 31st of December. So you have about $20 billion of that $39 billion that will not be spent. And then at the level of the current is $181 billion. And that also you have billions of dollars as regard procurement, drugs and medical supplies and other issues. About $10 to $15 billion of that money cannot be spent, will not be spent, because of the procurement cycle, how it functions. And so the budget whilst it is just an illusion, the numbers, the figures, $40 billion of that money will not get into the economic activity and the system to help to stimulate the economy at the time when you need all the stimulation that should happen. And so, as I said when I started, the government apparently are of the view that the citizens of this country, they have short memories, and so they can say something a month from now, and then by December they say something else, and you wouldn't remember what they said a month from now. And so that is what we're contending with. And among all the things that my comrades have said, this government is just in power for about 100 days, a little over 100 days. And when you examine in totality all the infringements, the lies, the deceit, the taking the Guyanese people for granted, it is a worrying trend and sign. And that is the reason why you have this deficit of confidence in the government. And that is the reason why instead of the economy doing better, it is doing worse. And until and unless the government is seen to be, and let me say this before I finish. Even persons that voted for the APNU AFC government, today, many of them, at least some of them have spoken up, but for the large majority of them, many are embarrassed because that was not their expectation. These people preached how much good and better they were than the PVP, how much bright and brilliant they were, more than the PVP government, how much more righteous they were than the PVP government. And today, what you have is hypocrisy and sometimes downright foolishness in alignment, because the incompetence and ineptitude that you see perpetuating, it is worrying. We're not talking about a government in power for years. We're talking about a government in power just 4 months. And you see all of this developing that is negative for this country. And so we thought that it was important that we come and we have this conversation with the media and the Guyanese people. With all of that said, our position is that we will continue to ensure that we fight on and for, on behalf of the Guyanese people, to ensure that the benefits and services that should come to them come to them. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now hear from Ms. Africa Selman, MP.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the media. I guess my colleagues have said it all. And judging from what they said, I can make an assumption or probably draw a conclusion that the new APNU administration can be described as a group of CIA men and women, corrupt, incompetent, and very arrogant. You know, the pronouncements and attitude displayed during the budget debate, I'm sure, left all Guyanese who were looking as a result of the live streaming. I'm sure they were quite disappointed with the attitude displayed by members of the APNU administration. In one, their refusal and non-cooperation as it relates to providing answers and information when questioned by members of the opposition. And in many instances, in particular when we were examining the capital expenditure, they directed members of the opposition attention to the project profile. And we are requesting the information not for our benefit, because, of course, we can read and we can follow what is the projects that are outlined in the project profile, but the information is for the Guyanese people who are listening, who want to know what projects are being done, who are interested in their own development, so Guyanese themselves can scrutinize what are in the estimates. And so we've seen the attitude, their unwillingness to account, and it is the very persons in the APNU administration, the leaders, who in 2014 basically demanded, using their one-seat majority, that there should be, I think they asked for 7 days for the examination of the estimate, so that you can really have transparency and accountability. They're the very ones, and which basically demonstrates hypocrisy, who turned around and said, and using their one-seat majority again, that as opposed to having 7 days, we will have 3 days to examine the estimates. And so we see the double standards and the hypocrisy coming out of the behavior of the APNU administration. Secondly, during the campaign, the election campaign, they promised that we'll have the reduction, a phase reduction in the value-added tax. And so we'll also have, they'll take education very seriously, because education is the cornerstone of development. And so they will ensure that we have access from nursery to university, that you won't have to pay fees at university level. But then we did see the behavior of the APNU AFC prior to the election campaign, when they decided that they'll cut the student loan. And that alone should have said to the nation that, you know, these people are really not interested in education and the development of young people. And so here we're seeing it playing out again, that they really are not interested, because there is no mention of students not having to pay fees at university level. The cash grants, which was introduced by the People's Progressive Party Civic in September 2014, we see it being withdrawn by the APNU administration. Even though we, during the budget debate, called upon the government, I personally did, to reconsider their position and perhaps move an amendment to give the $10,000. Because I don't know which world they live in, whether they live in Guyana or not, but people are really, really facing hardship, especially our single parents. And so many of them were dependent on the $10,000, especially those who have 5 and 6 and 7 children. And I guess if they go into the squatting areas in the country, they will see people with many children, single parents, and they look forward to the $10,000. And if it's 6 and 7 children, it would have been $60,000 or $70,000. And some of them were even banking on it, and so they did not put away anything during the year. But woe and behold, what a caring government! And so we see that they make promises which they have no intention of fulfilling. We also saw their arrogance as it relates to providing the information, when they refuse to basically provide the information during the budget debate. They say we'll prefer to lay it over in many instances. I guess they don't want Guyanese to hear the programs, and so they're trying to cover under that. But they haven't even laid over the information, I mean, up to this morning, 4 o'clock. And so I don't know how serious the APNU administration is. Basically, we see that there is no employment opportunities for Amerindians in the budget or in the estimates. But what we see, not only in the budget debate, what we see prior to them is the employment of party and political affiliates in senior position. We have them as advisors to the president. You have Edward Collins, who's advising the president, and I can call his name because he was always very close to the APNU even in 2011, I think he was one of the protesters who was shot. And so we see people being rewarded for their works and their effort, Simone Brooks. And in many instances, you have persons who are there, as one of my colleagues said, square pegs in round hole. They cannot basically perform their roles and their responsibilities because they do not have a clue, as we saw last night with Miss Henry, who in many instances had no answers for the questions that were being asked. And so I guess Guyanese are really seeing that maybe, or not maybe, they did make an error when they decided to vote for the APNU.
Thank you, Ms. Africo Selman. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, let me indicate to you some very salient points that you would need to examine. Number one, there is no provision in the budget for student loans, University of Guyana, in the year 2015. This is one of the questions we didn't get a chance to ask on the floor. Why? Because of the time constraints. The $450 million allocation that has been made consistently by the PPPC to the University of Guyana Students Loan Agency is absent under that budget line. Zero. Check your estimate. Zero. Number two, while the APNU AFC coalition government would have hoodwinked and told senior citizens that they're increasing their pension, under that aggregated total, only an addition $189 million have been included in the budget, which is insufficient to fund the increase announced by for old age pensioners. The PPPC last year, in provision of support to old age pensioners and public assistance, and in that category, spent $7.9 billion or so. The APNU in this year would have only budgeted less than $8.1 billion for that same line item, and you're indicating to people that you're having significant increase. What they would have done is the three-card trick. You take away with one hand, and you say you give with the other hand. When really and truly, the actual increase that an old age pensioner will get is about $350, $353 a month. So when uncle and granny collect $17,000 in September, October, November, and December, they will also be collecting bills that they never used to collect before, which is water and electricity. And the $17,000 will really mean nothing to them when they have to go and face the electricity company and the water company, because their actual increase is about $353 in pension, and that was hidden in the budget. Number two, the budget speech, number three, I should say, the budget speech that the Honorable Minister presented on August 10th was fluff and rhetoric, because he had all these fancy talk, and when you came to the actual examination of the estimates, in his budget speech, he says he's making transfers to Gaisuku and $23 billion for rice farmers. There is no such allocation in the budget. So rice farmers, what they got was nice gaff. And last night when we started to find out from him where he's getting the money to support this thing, he tried to dance around with all technicalities and in an arrogant way say, I make rings around them. Well, it is the first excursion into the public foray that all the Guyanese who were curious about giving a new administration a chance. Let us see what it would be like to have a different government. Well, you are seeing it for yourselves. We were accused, and I want you to listen to this very carefully, of fraud. We were accused of corruption where it came to the procurement of drugs and pharmaceuticals. This budget has indicated two things that the media needs to examine closely and the people of Ghana need to hear. Number one, there is a mechanism that is now put in place for contract splitting, because allocations have been made to regions. Even though the regions will not be actually utilizing the money, the allocations have been made to the regions, and we are told that the money will be sent back centrally for the procurement. You know what they're actually saying? That there will no longer have to be a block procurement of drugs, but they will be able to say, I'm procuring, even though centrally procured, I'm procuring it for Region 1. So you can have contract splitting, so people who don't satisfy the requirement of storage and capacity because of the volume that needs to be created, you could start buying now from suitcase traders, and we could end up with all kinds of things. But worse than that, if it is true that the PPPC were using their friends to rape the treasury of all these billions of dollars where we were accused of where procurement of pharmaceuticals were concerned, how is it that the bill for the medical supplies and pharmaceuticals have gone up by 300 million? If we were thieving the money, then the bill is supposed to have been less. How is it that you got $300 billion more now in the budget for the procurement of pharmaceuticals? Would it be logical for us to say, the same way you are accusing us of thieving the money, you have put in an additional $300 million so that you could thief? Number 4, Mr. Ramjatan stood up in the parliament and told this nation and regaled us with measures for security about how there will be additional CCTV cameras and there will be this wall of monitors where you'll be able to look and see what's happening at various points of the city. Lo and behold, when questioned in the Committee of Supply, there is no such budgetary allocation. And even the program that he's hoping to fund it, which is the Citizen Security Program, there's not even an agreement by the IDB to make adjustments to the program to facilitate that announced measure. So Mr. Ramjatan was dreaming, while you have an international agency that you're borrowing money from and there's a signed agreement as it relates to what these monies should be doing. In his dream world, he whimsically announced to the nation by way of budget speech that this is what he's doing, only to discover that when we examine the estimates, there's no money to do it. So we have been bluffed, duped, and deceived one more time by the APNU AFC. And worse than that, a fresh approach in a green economy. The flagship program under the LCDS and the allocations to bring about the green economy in Guyana and accessing funds from Norway. The Minister of Finance last night was unwilling, unable, or downright reluctant to talk about how you're going to utilize this money from Norway in this green economy. Because in this money from Norway, there's $80 million that have been assigned for Amalia. You know what I'm actually saying to us? Guyana stands to lose $80 million that we would have earned. This is not a grant or a donation. This is money Guyana would have earned because we are providing forest and carbon services to the world. And the Minister of Finance cannot, up until now, explain what is taking place there. In my budget presentation, and maybe it missed you, I said, number 1, there is no new initiative. There's no new project. There's no new mobilization of funds. But what we had is a reordering of priorities based upon a particular thinking. And that particular thinking was displayed with the arrogance, the extravagance, and the total disrespect for the working class and ordinary people of Guyana. I accuse the government, and I'm putting it again, that this government is an urban, upper middle class, Judeo-Christian elite. They don't have any touch with the ordinary people, and their budget measures are not impacting the ordinary man. Let's look at the Borbis River Bridge toll. $300 reduction, everybody's jumping up, oh, there's a reduction. It's just bluff. You know who benefits? The man who drives himself to the number 63 beach to go and have a nice time with his family. He pays $300 less when he's crossing the bridge. The commuter who have to go to work every day and the school children who have to go to work every day, that will not impact them. Because the minibus will only pay $300 less, and that will turn out to be about $10 reduction in the fare, and the bus drivers already say, I ain't reducing no fare by $10. So we are forking out $36 million out of the Treasury for the rest of the year to fund that elite upper middle class group who are enjoying life in London, as we put it. We took away the money from the $10,000 cash grant because we care. And the Minister of Education said in his budget speech and so on, fancy language, we are going to expand the feeding program for the children. So rather than giving the parents the money, we're going to actually use the same monies to do enhanced feeding programs in the school. When we checked the estimates and questioned the minister, only to discover there is no expanded feeding program. You know what I'm suggesting to you? That 90-page document that the Minister of Finance stood up and read on August 10th does not relate to what just completed over the last 3 days, the examination of the estimates. That 90-page document was a well-crafted document to hoodwink, deceive, and to project themselves as doing something for the people. But when you came to the crunch of the numbers, in reality, these things does not exist. And this is a sign. This is a sign to suggest that the pact, the social contract that was made with the people of Guyana, put us there and we will look after your interests. What we have is they looking after their interests. At another press conference, I will outline to you the luxury acquisition of items by the various ministers. In 3 months, the Attorney General left a vehicle behind for the current Attorney General, which was bought about 2 years ago. There's an $18.5 million allocation for the now Attorney General for the acquisition of a vehicle in this year. You know, it's an $18.5 million duty-free vehicle. But what happens? The vehicle that was used by the former Attorney General only cost about $7 or $8 million. So it's not duty-free. So it's not too luxurious for that individual to use. PPP 10. Go around the country and see. PPP 10 was the VIP car that was used by the former Prime Minister. That was his car that he used. The now Prime Minister has degraded PPP 10 for use by the security. PPP 10 is now the security backup car, the car that our Prime Minister, Samuel Hines, went around this whole country with for how many years? It's now the security car, and in this budget, Mr. Nagamutu has an allocation of $22 million for the acquisition of a new luxury vehicle to go and meet the people who voted for him. And the people who voted for him can't get a $9 million repair to a school or a $3 million repair to a bridge or a $10,000 cash grant. And we are putting it to you that this government is based upon extravagance. Ladies and gentlemen, the Presidential Guard Service has received an allocation of $50 million more in 2015. But I don't have to tell you why. You were there in the Parliament. This is not the guards for His Excellency the President. And unlike us, they cut out the money for the Presidential Guard last year and left President Donald Ramotar without allocations to pay Presidential Guards. Remember that. But you know why there's an increased allocation of $50 million for the Presidential Guard? Mr. Moses Nagamutu, the current Prime Minister, did you see the amount of security he has around him? And his convoy is not 2 cars, as it was in the case of the Prime Minister Samuel Hines. It's now 4 cars. So you have 4 drivers plus 9 security personnel on a shift. And that explains the extravagance. So, the superfluous approach to expenditure, the ostentatious behavior of senior government officials so early is speaking volumes. They are out of touch with reality. And like I said, when you listen to the rhetoric in the budget speech, of course it was what you call a drive-through service, where speeches were dropped off of various individuals, And what they basically did was to stand up there and read for 30 minutes, and some of them were not even familiar with the text that they were reading, and some of them needed a lessons in phonics to pronounce the words because they weren't even familiar with the word, the pronunciation of the word, or the meaning of the words that they were using. And there was no sincerity in what they were saying. It was a drive-through arrangement. Collect your speech, read it on the appropriate day. Now that we have to deal with these issues, I'm saying to us, the budget, it is not just PPP propaganda, but it's a hollow document. And like I said, we could have taken an obstructionist approach based upon all of the things that Mr. Nandlal would have applied. But we choose to use our votes in the parliament to work with the government to correct it. So we had an appropriation bill that was passed last night as amended. As amended. So we now take your questions.
Majority in the House to vote down some stuff. Like yesterday, you could have, there was more.
Because that's not our approach. The leader of the opposition, Dr. Bharat Jagdeo, indicated in his very first speech when he was elected as leader of the opposition and the speaker introduced that subject to the House, he said, we will never use our votes in the House to rob the people of Guyana what they deserve. The people of Guyana deserve to have a budget. This economy needs to be stimulated. People need to have the assurance that they will get paid. The private sector needs to start regaining confidence. We need to see this economy going. And even when there were times, like you were saying, we had the majority because we could have voted, they weren't there. We will not be reckless in our approach to power. We are here to serve all the people of Guyana. So we use our majority and our positions at a particular time to have things that were incorrect corrected, and that will be our continual approach.
However, Mr. Jagdeo would have said that prior to the considerations, and then you're essentially saying that during the considerations you weren't satisfied with the information that you were getting. So I feel like there's a little bit of contradictory.
No, if I may, Pushpa, it's not our approach to deny money to the economy. Anytime you cut, that is what you do. We believe that there must be an injection of money for there to be stimulation, for increased economic activity to take place because of the economic downturn which has plagued this economy since the new government assumed power. We could have cut many things. The Prime Minister Land Cruiser, for example, Mr. Williams Land Cruiser, they're all undeserving. $20 million to repair the Prime Minister house, $15 million for furniture. We could have, and many other instances. But the people out there are judging. They claim that they won the elections. They have made commitment to the people of Guyana, and the people will judge them. I could have gone to the courts, for example, and stopped the auditing exercise. The forensic auditing exercise that is taking place is completely illegal and unconstitutional on two fronts. One, the manner by which the services of these people were procured. Last night we heard that it is costing this country in excess of $150 million. If you look at the Procurement Act, it mandates that any contract of that value must be administered by the by the tender board. And the tender board is bound by the provisions of that act that mandates it to go to public competitive bidding. That did not happen. You had not the tender board, but the Minister of Finance handpicking in complete and utter disregard for the Procurement Act. He handpicked two known protagonists of the APNU AFC while they were in opposition, Christopher Ram and Anand Gulsaran, and then instructed them to hire more. So these two agents, Gulsaran and Ram, became suddenly, by a word of mouth of the Minister of Finance, became agents of the government to retain other auditors for the purposes of auditing public accounts. Ram, I'm told, is being paid 40 million or more, and Mr. Gulsaran, $8.5 million. Had that happened under the PVP government, you would have been tired of reading in the Stabrook News, as Pushpa asked the question, and in the other newspapers about what Ram and Gulsaran, who are both, I think, contributors to the Stabrook News on a regular basis, as well as in other newspapers, of what they would have written about this transaction. That is the manner of the procurement. And then the nature of the inquiry upon which they are embarking. Both the Audit Act as well as the Constitution prescribe a role for the Auditor General for the purpose of auditing public accounts. The Auditor General has a particular mandate given to him and to that office, the Audit Office, by the laws of this country. You can't simply, without consultation with the Auditor General, and outside of the Auditor General's direction, authority, and authorization, the executive simply picking people to audit public accounts. That is completely illegal, and we could have gone to the court and get an order. But we didn't do that. You know why? Because some of you maybe would have been the first to write to say that we are afraid of the audits, that we have something to hide. So we prefer to withstand the scrutiny of the audit. We prefer to let them scrutinize us by the audit. Though it is an illegal exercise, let them scrutinize us by the audit, because we are prepared to withstand that kind of scrutiny. And let the Guyanese people see how they are flouting the law and how they are using the taxpayers' money as if it is their money. So they decide to give X a job. They don't have to forget the procurement process. The treasury is ours. We can hire who we want on whatever terms to do what we want them to do. That is what characterizes this government. And that is why, Pushpa, we gave this government a chance, free rein, prepare your budget, we will support you, we will criticize you heavily, but we are not going to stop any of the initiatives that you may wish to implement. Let it happen and let the people judge you. You are the government.
Obviously accused the government of a lot of inconsistencies and other faults, but you're not willing to cut on certain allocations. Is it then that you're leaving the government to their own devices, whether the country will suffer or not? Are you leaving them to their own devices and waiting for them to self-destruct?
Let Comrade Angel go first in this.
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to say, in answer to the first and probably the second, that there is a philosophical difference between the way we are and the way the new government is. Because, you know, we who came out of 28 years know what we inherited. And we don't want to go down that road. Because, you know what? Our young people and our children will stand to suffer. And therefore, when we took the decision that we will support anything that is good for Guyana, it was precisely because of that. Because we don't want Guyana to go back. We want it to go forward. And we will be, as we have said, that we will use the Parliament and all these opportunities to talk to the people about these matters.
Actually, just before you go further, to be specific, I'm not speaking about capital projects, works, and stuff like that. I'm talking specifically to the extravagance that you've cultivated.
Well, we will use Parliament as a forum to discuss these. Apart from the budget presentation, we have Members' Day, and we have questions that we can put to ministers, and we have you, the press, that we can speak to, because all of us collectively will have to speak, will have to expose these matters to the public out there. So
just to
you
say,
know,
this is not the end. The
Exactly.
fact that the estimates have been considered and we now have an Appropriation Act, this is not the end of all the action that the PPPC will take
That's right.
as it relates to the extravagance that has taken place. I would not want to preempt by telling you what are some of the other things that we will do, but this is not the end of all the action that will be taken.
But Zina Henry, right? The court has ruled, and that ruling has not been overruled, that the opposition in our parliament, under our constitutional structure,
Cannot
has
touch.
no power to cut the budget. That position has not changed. They have violated the court order by repeatedly cutting budgets, sometimes reducing them, and sometimes cutting them completely. But we have a court order, we have a court ruling
From the Chief Justice.
that says that you cannot cut.
So the new opposition will hold to that, regardless of what has happened in the past.
Will hold to what?
The order, court order.
Well, it's a court
No, no.
order. We don't have a choice in the matter unless a court rule otherwise. We respect the rule of law, unlike the other side that writes it in a budget speech, and then the very next step in the budgetary process violates the rule of law.
Let me say this quickly. You know, for me, it is useful and important this period, more so for the young people, because you were never put in a position to make a judgment on two political entities. You know, we went around this country 2011, 2015, saying to people, some of the things you're experiencing will happen. We predicted. So for us, whilst we continue to bring it to you, and we will continue to do that, for us, it is not something that we didn't expect to happen. We know the characters and the operators in the government. And therefore, we said to you in 2011, and we said to you in 2015, these are the things that will happen. The government will be prone to authoritarianism. We made the point about military officers in government and the historical data that you have, because military officers are incapable of being democratic. They're not trained to be democratic. And so, for us, whilst all this negative will happen and continue to happen, it has put us as a nation in a place whereby we can make determinations as to the PPP and the PNC. You never had that opportunity, you young people who are 30, 35, to do that before May 2011. And therefore, we are not praying that the government will fail. But I can say to you categorically, we know the government will fail, because as you would have seen, the interests that they should have about the Guyanese people, they don't have. They have an interest for fortifying themselves.
Yes, any other questions?
Mr. Nana, Susie report.
Yes.
Very quickly, you mentioned that the FMA, that there could be, the finance minister could be held criminally responsible.
One of the amendments that was made to the act was to make the finance minister chargeable for wrongdoings committed, alleged, let me say alleged.
Can you say if there were, can you point to any examples, or if we saw that in this budget or not?
No,
Let me just put it this way. Let me just put it this way.
I don't want to go that far.
Remember, these kinds of amendments
I sleep yet, you know, since
was actually raised by Mr. Greenidge while they were in opposition. At that time, the opposition never thought that they will get into government. So this was to get at Ashley Singh. All these amendments was, and they had to live by it, because now that they're in government and they are there. But listen to
one promise that they kept.
But listen,
unfortunately, there.
Listen to the approach of this government. You guys, the PVPC, are crooks, vagabonds, rogues, and scams. So we have to hold you to an account. We are the righteous ones. So why are you asking us questions? What do you want to find out that about? What are you asking that for? We are good people. We are righteous. So in their head, accountability and all this charging of the minister is only when the PVPC is in government and office. It doesn't exist on their part because, like I said, they are the Judeo-Christian righteous. They are the people with the moral compass to Guyana. They are the people with the answers to all things. This time for righteousness and so on. And if you see the yard fowl market behavior in the parliament, you will be able to judge. And you were there and you saw the yard fowl market culture that was elevated to that August assembly that we were subject to, where even though there were denials, several people heard the four-letter word being used, where one of our MPs, and I hope that she comes out and speaks about it, was told by a government minister, the only way you were able to get a seat in here is because you changed your name. I'm referring to Ms. Jillian Prasad. Racist. The most racist statement that you could hear from a government minister telling Ms. Jillian Prasad, Jillian Bort, now married, and is Jillian Prasad, that the only reason why you get a seat is because you changed your name. What depth of racism? Had that been said by a member of the PPPC, you know what would be blaring across the headlines? The calling of the leader of the opposition a coolie bully. And it's almost like I accused the media before, and I don't want to fight with you, of the conspiracy of silence. And I did say it would appear that a memo has been circulated to the media house, the four estate of the country, at what they could report. But now we're discovering that it wasn't actually circulated. It was actually told. Because now a Chronicle reporter is in trouble for a particular headline, because you're seeing there's no interest in democracy and fairness. And this is where the problem lies. So is there any other questions before I ask my colleagues to close up with final statements?
You did say that you keep the government accountable.
Yes, we will.
What do you intend to do to keep them accountable?
Sir, that will be unfolded as we continue in the parliament. I can tell you, exciting days are ahead. Every time there's a sitting of parliament, I encourage every member of the media corps to attend, because there will be more revelations. There are much more that we could say and do, and the appropriate action to bring the people of Guyana up to speed and to make them fully aware of the shortcomings of this APNU plus AFC coalition government will not be spared. We will not spare them. So exciting days are ahead. The people of Guyana will see it. Any closing remarks, Ms. Selman, before we go? No. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, thank you very much for your attendance. I just didn't want...
I want to interject to say